I'll just introduce myself. I'm Kathy Pedler. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Adirondack Mountain Club, and we're just so happy that you can join us today for our backcountry water monitoring training this year. And just wanted to, in addition to letting you know how to mute and how to ask questions, that we're going to be recording today's event, so whatever you need to do to stay comfortable during the training, go ahead and do that, and you'll be able to, if you miss something, you'll be able to see the recording. We'll send that to you after the program. And in addition, after the program, we'll also be sending you links to different handouts that can help you with the material that we cover during the training, and that'll be in a Dropbox. I'll just go over the agenda briefly before we get going. So first, we're going to have Maggie, who's been communicating with you, and she's our Backcountry Water Monitor Trip Leader. She's going to give a brief introduction to the Adirondack Mountain Club. Then Erin Venny-Volrath from APIP, she's the Aquatic Invasive Species Project Coordinator. She's going to give an overview of efforts to combat invasive species in the Adirondacks, and then show us invasive plant identification, help us with that. And then the survey protocol that we use in the Adirondacks and how to protect our beautiful lakes and ponds by practicing clean, drain, and dry. At that point, which will be around 11:15, we'll take a 10-minute break. So, we'll have a nice long break for you to go get some more coffee or some snacks. And then I'll jump on and give you an overview of the Backcountry Water Monitor project. Then Maggie's going to come on and talk to us about Leave No Trace and some things that you need to know before you get out on the trail, the 10 essentials and different ways to improve your backcountry skills. And she'll also present an overview of the guided pond surveys that we have in the project. So if you don't feel comfortable going out on your own or with a buddy immediately and you want to go out on a guided trip, you can come on one of those, and Maggie will talk about that. Then I'll jump back on towards the end of the program and go through the simple aquatic survey form, which was what your homework was all about. And if you didn't get your homework done, that's perfectly fine. You'll have all of the materials to go through that after the presentation. So as I'm going through those slides, you can just follow along and take some notes, and we're available to help you with that mobile app and with IMAP Invasives after the project. So I'm not sure if I missed anything, but I think that's it. And we'll let Maggie start.
Yeah, hi, I'm Maggie Newell. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm ADK's Backcountry Water Monitoring Trip Leader. This is my 5th summer season working for ADK and my 3rd year guiding. I'm really excited to be helping out with this program this year. So the Adirondack Mountain Club is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation, preservation, and responsible recreational use of New York State wildlands and waters. So we do a lot of work to spread awareness and teach responsible recreation. We are a membership-driven organization, so we have about 30,000 members spread across the country. We also have 27 chapters across New York State that host outings and do work in their areas. So the Backcountry Water Monitoring Project is one of the many, many things we do. And if we do have any members joining us today, we'd like to thank you for your membership. Our membership dollars go to support all the backcountry water monitoring, the trail work, and all that we do. If you would like to learn more about membership, you can visit our website at adk.org or reach out to me after the training. Thank you. All right, Erin?
So I'll take over, and so I have some different slides, and so the flow of my slides will go an overview about aquatic invasive species and where we are here in the Adirondacks, and then some invasive species identification, and then follow up with some monitoring protocols. Oops. Let me get my technology working. Here we go. So just to give a little bit of background with the program that I work with, we're the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, or APIP for short, and we're one of the 8 PRISMs, or Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management, in the state of New York, which you're seeing a map of the different PRISMs throughout New York State. And as you can see, no matter where you are in the state, you do have people who work on invasive species through a PRISM. So I encourage you to reach out if you're in another PRISM, to definitely reach out to staff there to learn more about the projects that are going on in your area. So APIP's mission is to protect the Adirondacks from the negative impacts of non-native invasive species. Oops. And I should mention that our logo has changed for those who are used to our old logo. We do have this nice new logo for the PRISM. So our goals to meet our mission are, 1, to prevent new introductions into the region, and we do that largely through education and outreach efforts. Our second goal is to rapidly detect and eradicate new infestations. And our volunteer programs, both working with the Adirondack Mountain Club on the Backcountry Water Monitor program, as well as our volunteer network for some of the larger lakes and ponds in the area, play a key role in that rapid detection of new infestations of invasive species. And then our last goal is to manage existing priority infestations to mitigate the impacts that invasive species have. And our program is hosted through the Nature Conservancy, but we also have 4 principal partners that we work very closely with: the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Adirondack Park Agency, and the Department of Transportation. And then we also have over 30 other organizations in the partnership. ADK Mountain Club is one of those that we work on a variety of projects with. And our funding is through the New York State Environmental Protection Fund, administered by the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. So I'd like to start out talking about some of the different terms that I use when I talk about invasive species, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first is, what do we mean by a native species? That's one that is indigenous to the region. We say pre-European settlement. Non-native species then are ones that were either accidentally or purposefully introduced outside its historical range, whether that's another part of the US or another part of North America or from another continent. Invasive species then are non-native species that have certain characteristics. Usually they reproduce rapidly, they'll displace native species, and then they cause some sort of measurable harm, either to the ecology, to the economy, or to human health. And then lastly, sometimes we talk about nuisance species. And these can be natives or non-natives that interfere with how we want to use the resource, or they interfere with human activities. So why are some non-natives invasive? There's a few things that really give them a step up. First, invasives tend to be brought to a new area without the predators, parasites, or diseases that might keep their population in check. They also often have either many offspring or they produce a lot of seeds. So for example, my upper right picture there is a purple loosestrife, one of our wetland invasive species, and it can produce over a million, up to 3 million seeds per plant. Also, a lot of our invasives have multiple ways that they can reproduce. And by that, I mean mostly our plants. And my example there is the middle photo. One of our region's watch species, Hydrilla, can reproduce 4 different ways. The stem can fragment, each fragment can grow roots. It can produce seeds. It can produce little turians, which are essentially overwintering little buds that will overwinter and grow into new plants in the spring. And then lastly, it produces tubers, which are tiny, kind of like potato-like structures that it will create in the sediments. A lot of our invasive species are generalists, so they can live in a lot of different substrates, different water chemistry requirements, different temperatures. So they're not very picky about where they live. And then lastly, they're really good at monopolizing resources. So on my bottom photo, there is one of our floating and aquatic invasive species called water chestnut. So it creates a large mat on the surface of the water. and it uses up all the sunlight, so it shades out any native plants underneath. I want to highlight a lot of the benefits of our native plants, because as I talk about our invasives, I'll talk often about how they, shade out our native plants or outcompete our natives. And so I just want to highlight why we care so much about our native plants. They're very important in providing food for a lot of our animals in the system. They also provide shelter and spawning habitat. They're important in producing oxygen in our lakes and rivers. They protect the shoreline and help stabilize sediments at the bottom of the lake. And in turn, that helps reduce the turbidity, or the amount of particulates that are in the water column, helping keep the water more clear. They're also important in transporting nutrients throughout the system. And lastly, they're very helpful in supporting diversity. If you can imagine, if we have a lot of different types of native plants, then that creates different little microhabitats for other organisms to live in. With aquatic invasive species, we see a lot of ecological impacts. If you can imagine a nice, beautiful lake like this, if we get something like my example here is Eurasian water milfoil, one of our invasive species, they tend to take over essentially. They'll create these large monocultures of just that single plant. Often with our aquatic invasive plants, we'll have these large beds that come up to the surface of the water, and will create these mats that in turn shade out a lot of things underneath. So we see with invasives coming in is a loss of biodiversity. We'll see disruptions in the food chains as we lose our native species that used to live there. We see decreased light and also oxygen underneath these beds of plants. We'll see changes and increases in sedimentation and changes in our nutrient loading. We see effects to our pH as well as temperature levels in these beds of plants. And then lastly, if you can imagine, if you think of a river getting bogged up with some of these different invasive plants, it impacts both the drainage as well as the ability for the system to control large amounts of flood water. We also see many economic impacts when an invasive species comes into a system. With that change in the diversity and reduction in biodiversity, we see a reduction in productivity. We also see impaired recreational activities. For example, if you can imagine in the lake that I have behind us, not a lot of people want to swim through that or boat through that, and it's hard to fish in it. So we see fewer people visiting because of that. And that has negative impacts on our tourism as well. And then we also see reductions in property values. There's a study done in Vermont looking to see the property value change when Eurasian water milfoil came into a lake, and they saw up to a 16% decrease in property values with lakes that had a lot of invasive species in them. So to the US, we see costs having to do with invasive species up to an estimated about $140 billion each year. With invasive species, we talk often about early detection and rapid response. And so I just wanted to highlight an example of this. Here's one of our wetland invasive species, purple loosestrife. And if you can imagine, we might have one or two plants that pop up in a wetland first. And at this point, it would be pretty easy to control. We could essentially just take a shovel and dig up those plants. And so it's a pretty minimal cost, and getting rid of it from the wetland is actually possible at this point. But if we wait, we don't notice it right away, maybe, and the purple loosestrife extends through the wetland. At this point, in 15, 20 years, it would take a lot of work to try to remove it from this wetland. A lot of money would have to go into this. There would be a lot of damage trying to manage it at this point. And the eradication or actually getting rid of it is very unlikely. I wanted to highlight a few examples of where early detection has really made a difference. In the Grass River up near Lamson Falls in the northwestern part of the park, one of our invasive plants, European frogbit, which is the photo on the top right here, was found. And in 2007, our program started managing it. And when we were managing it, I think about 35 5-gallon buckets of this plant were removed over a few days. And we're still visiting this site now. And at this point, we removed maybe a quarter of a 5-gallon bucket or less. Some years we've been able to find no European frog bit at this location. We also see examples of potential eradication of Eurasian water milfoil in some of the Fulton chain lakes. In 2009, some small beds of Eurasian water milfoil were found, and one of our partners, the Adirondack Watershed Institute, went in and hand harvested these small beds right away. And we've had different surveys done in these lakes since and haven't been able to find Eurasian water milfoil in these lakes. And then lastly, we have a few lakes that have had water chestnut show up, and we've seen great reductions of the numbers in these lakes due to hand harvesting every year in these waters, especially Loon Lake in the southeastern part of the park. When it was found, water chestnut was found in this lake, I think it was 10 or 12 plants were found and quickly hand harvested. And over the last 2 years, there's been no water chestnut found. So it really is first trying to prevent the introduction of these aquatic invasive species into the lakes. And then also having eyes out there like yours doing surveys, looking for the plants when they're small and they might be able to be managed with success. So in the Adirondacks, we have 6 target aquatic invasive plants that we have in the region and that we work with. So the top 3 here, Eurasian water milfoil, variable leaf milfoil, and curly leaf pondweed, are pretty widespread through the region. There's a lot of management going on for these species at different lakes. And so we categorize them into a tier 4 species, which is one that focuses on suppression, trying to make sure that we reduce their impacts in the lakes that they're in, and also try to make sure that they're not spread from those lakes. We have a few waters that have European frogbit as well as fanwort, and so those are in our tier 3, where we try to make sure that they don't leave those lakes. We prevent the spread of them to other lakes in the Adirondacks. And then lastly, we have water chestnut in both the Champlain Lake to our east, as well as a few water bodies through the kind of the eastern part of the Adirondacks at very low numbers. And so we've been focused at trying to eradicate the water chestnut from the waters that are in the Adirondacks, excluding Lake Champlain. And so I'll go a bit more later about how to identify these species. We also have one aquatic plant that is our tier 1 or prevention, one that it's not yet in the Adirondacks, but it is in the state of New York, and we're very worried that it might get brought to the Adirondacks, and that is hydrilla. And so this one has been explained to me or described to me by some of the state aquatic plant experts, is that it's kind of like the Godzilla of aquatic invasive species. This plant can outcompete even Eurasian water milfoil. It grows very, very fast. And as you can see in the photo on the bottom there, it grows very densely and just a big, massive plant growth that nothing else can really live in. So I'll talk more about identification of hydrilla as well in a little bit. We also have a handful of aquatic invasive animals in the Adirondacks that we work with. All of these fit into our tier 3 or containment. And so we have 2 small zooplankton or like a floating crustacean that would live in the middle of the lake. And that's spiny water flea and fishhook water flea. We have 1 snail that we work with, Chinese mystery snail. And then 2 mollusks on the bottom, zebra mussels and Asian clams. And I'll give a bit more information about those in a little bit. We also have 2 tier 1 species, so ones that are in the state of New York, but not yet in the Adirondacks as far as we know. One is a crayfish called rusty crayfish, and then the other is kind of a cousin of zebra mussels, quagga mussels. So talking more about where we have our aquatic invasive species in the Adirondacks, I have up on the slide a map showing all of the lakes that both APIP partners, staff, and volunteers like yourselves have been able to survey a little over 420 lakes in the region. And of the ones that have been surveyed, almost 75% are still free of aquatic invasive species, which is really a lot of potential here in the Adirondacks to make sure that our lakes stay free of aquatic invasive species. Of the ones that do have an invasive species, the vast majority, I think it's over 90%, have only 1 or 2 aquatic invasive species in them. So again, a lot of potential to make sure that we're not spreading invasives around, and why we need to be vigilant about looking for any new small populations. So we're relatively uninvaded in the Adirondacks, but we have a lot of sources of aquatic invasive species and non-native species around us. So the map that you're seeing here is from the Lake Champlain Basin Program's State of the Lake report. And they look to see, how many natives and how many invasives and non-natives are in our large water bodies around the region. And so as you can see, the Great Lakes have 187, St. Lawrence River 87, Lake Champlain is up to, I think, 51 species now, and then the Hudson River is at about 122. So we do have a lot of sources of non-native and invasive species around us. We also know, thanks to the work of our partners at the Adirondack Watershed Institute, who has boat stewards at a lot of our boat launches, that ask boaters, where was the last water body you were before you came here? And from that, we know that we have a lot of boaters coming from those source populations like the Great Lakes and the Hudson River and the St. Lawrence River that are coming to the Adirondacks. And so there's a lot of potential of them possibly bringing aquatic invasive species with them when they come to visit. With aquatic invasive species, we know that the main way of spread is on motorized boats and their trailers. And so my example here is a lot of aquatic plants that have gotten stuck on boats and the motor and the trailer. There is some movement of invasive plants and animals on non-motorized boats like canoes or kayaks, but the chance is a lot less that they'll have, be carrying aquatic invasives. So as you can imagine, it's pretty easy at this point to look at this motorboat and remove any attached plants that you can see. And so that's really been the most successful way, is to have boat stewards at launches talking to people about how to inspect their boat and remove aquatic plants. There also is potentially little pockets of water on the watercraft or in a bait bucket or a live well, or there might be things like zebra mussels attached to the hull of the boat. And so with these small animals, what we found is that, both cleaning and then making sure that everything's drained really well, that there's no standing water, and letting everything dry completely is really the best way to kill aquatic species. However, if you don't have enough time, we usually say 5 days to let everything dry out really well. Then the boat wash stations that are around the region, thanks to a lot of our partners, especially the Adirondack Watershed Institute, have these boat wash stations that you can visit that use a high pressure hot water wash to both kill and remove aquatic invasive species on boats. So as I was talking about in the last slide, we really tell people to make sure that you're not spreading aquatic invasive species. It's important to first clean, inspect your equipment in your boat, remove anything that you see that might be attached, whether that's animals, plants, or mud, draining everything from your watercraft and equipment, and then letting everything dry. And if you can't let everything dry, then visiting one of those boat wash stations. We have a lot of people out on the ground surveying for invasives, both the professional teams as well as volunteers like yourself. And so I wanted to show over the years, we're seeing on the x-axis here that every year, and then on the y-axis is the bars are the cumulative number of lakes that have been surveyed for invasive species. And so we see over time that we've been able to survey more and more lakes, and we do see a small increase in the number of invaded lakes over time. We also see great bumps in the number of uninvaded lakes that we've been able to survey. And I wanted to just highlight over these last 6, or I guess 5, 6 years now, we've really seen a nice big bump in the number of lakes that have been surveyed. And a lot of that is thanks to the work of the backcountry water monitors, as well as our early detection team that we have on the ground. And so, as I mentioned, we have an early detection team that does surveys as well every summer. And so this team, we've had them on the ground for 6 summers now. It's ranged from anywhere from a 2-person crew to a 4-person crew that goes out to do surveys. And in the past, we've contracted both with the Adirondack Watershed Institute as well as the Adirondack Research for this work. And what they do is they focus on one of these sub-regions every summer, and they visit about 40 lakes in each region to do early detection surveys for aquatic invasive species. There's also some fun work going on out there looking more specifically at lake mapping. And so for a lot of our lakes, we have very limited information about the different, even the different depths of the lake, as well as, where there might be different substrates in a lake or different aquatic plant growth. And so we've really been working to better map lakes so that we know which ones may be more vulnerable to a certain aquatic invasive species, as well as where in a lake we might want to better target searches for different invasive species. And so we've been using a sonar system called Lowrance that's essentially a fish finder and collecting sonar data. We're able to upload that into a cloud-based software system called BioBase that then uses that sonar data to create 3 different maps for us. On the left shows us where we have aquatic plants growing in the lake. The map in the middle shows us more detailed maps of the depths of the lake. And then also on the right, we get a map that shows the different substrates of a lake. And so we've been able to, or we hope to use these maps and this data in the future, again, to better target where we should look for invasives in the lake, and then also which lakes might be more vulnerable to aquatic invasives. And then lastly, I wanted to touch a little bit on the different aquatic invasive species management that's going on around the region. And so a lot of the management that we see in the Adirondacks is for lakes that have Eurasian water milfoil and have been managing them for many years now at this point. The majority of the lakes do their management hiring contractors that do diver hand harvesting, essentially, where the divers go under the water and they will hand pull the Eurasian water milfoil or the variable leaf milfoil out of the lake. We do have some instances as well where we have these large benthic mats that are used to essentially shade out and smother out invasive species, and that's another way to manage. And then we do have the rare occasion where a lake will use a chemical to treat their invasive species beds if all other management efforts have been tried and have not been successful. So this is wrapping up my overview, but I just wanted to let you know that we have a lot of resources about invasive species work on our website, which is adkinvasives.com. We also have an email listserv that you could sign up for if you wanted to keep track of what our program is up to, what kinds of different training opportunities we have. We also sometimes post different funding opportunities for invasive species work. And then we also have a Facebook page if you want to keep up with what's going on with our program there. And then, so that's my quick overview. I'll just pause here to see if, Maggie, has there been any questions that have come through the chat?
No questions in the chat.
It sounds like if we don't have any questions, I'll move on. And so the next part of my section will be to talk about identification of these different target aquatic invasive species that we'll have you look for when you do your survey. And I just want to give a shout out to the slides that I show for the aquatic plants. I've adapted from Larry Eichler of the Darren Freshwater Institute. He often helps me with some of the trainings. And so he has such great slides that I just figured I'd use them. So I'm going to start out first by talking about our aquatic invasive plants. And so the different terms that I'll be using when I talk about how to identify aquatic invasive plants, we'll often be talking about the veins of the plant. For the most part, I'll be talking about, I should fix that, that's not net-like, but on the top there, I'll be talking more about the midrib, which is the center vein that goes through the leaf. And then I'll be talking about some of these side veins that I'll be calling leaflets. I'll also talk about more the edge of the leaf, whether it's a smooth edge to the leaf or if it has tiny teeth or toothed. And then whether it's lobed potentially or serrated would be more exaggerated or more larger teeth essentially. And then lastly, on the very far right there, I'll talk about the arrangement of the leaves. So I'll talk about if it's alternate, that it has one, if you're thinking about the stem, you'll have one leaf come off one side and then you'll go up the stem a little bit and you'll have another leaf come off the other side. So that'll be alternate. We have some that have opposite leaves. So you'll have the stem and then you'll have leaves coming off opposite each other on the stem. And then lastly, I'll talk about whorled, where we'll have the stem and you'll have 3 or more leaves that are all at the same point coming off the stem. So first, talking about Eurasian water milfoil. This is our most widespread invasive species in the Adirondacks. It's in about 60 of our lakes that we know of. This species frequently reaches the surface and forms a canopy that shades out native species underneath. It grows really fast where the stem can elongate up to 1 centimeter a day. And it is spread mostly by fragmentation, where you can get a small section of the stem as long as it includes a little set of leaves that can grow into a new plant. The map here I've gotten from our online statewide database for invasive species distribution, IMAP Invasives, which we'll be talking about more later. But this is to show you where we know in the state there are populations of Eurasian water milfoil. And so the size of each of those yellow dots is the number of reports that have been made of Eurasian water milfoil throughout the state. So as you can see, it's pretty widespread in the state. How to identify Eurasian water milfoil is that it has about four or maybe sometimes more leaves whorled around the stem. On the bottom or on the left side of the photo there, we have just a single leaf from one of those whorls of leaves. And you can see that the leaves kind of look like a feather, where you have that center midrib and then you have leaflets that come off of that main midrib. It's very, very neat looking for Eurasian water milfoil, or tidy looking, where you have the leaflets are set opposite each other very nicely, very neatly. If you look at the tip of the leaf for Eurasian water milfoil, it's blunt, almost like somebody took scissors and cut off that or snipped the tip of the leaf there. The stems will often be a red or pinkish in color, but they can vary depending on the lake. It will have later in the summer, even though I'm starting to see it already this summer, it'll shoot up a flower above the surface of the water. That's a little flower stalk that almost looks like a little pipe cleaner sticking up out of the water. And then lastly, the leaves are pretty limp, and there's a lot of distance between each set of whorls on the stem. So when you pull it out of the water, all the leaves collapse around the stem, and it looks very almost like a rope. So my example here is just a photo of Eurasian water milfoil, and you kind of see how the leaves kind of collapse around the stem, and you have a lot of space between each set or each whorl of leaves. And that'll be important when I talk later about some of our other milfoil species. We have another invasive milfoil called variable leaf milfoil, and this one also tends to reach the surface and create those canopies that shades out our native plants. It has a very dense, bushy growth form to it, so if you see it growing underneath the water, it'll almost look like a bottle brush, or it'll look like if you have a very furry cat who you've scared and his tail is, you know, all the fur on its tail is sticking out. It kind of looks like that underneath the water. This one also disperses primarily through fragmentation. It's not as widespread in the state of New York. We see it more in the Adirondacks, and it's often on the western and northwestern side of the park, and that's probably due to the water chemistry. It seems to like more soft waters, which we see on the western side of the park. For identification of variable leaf milfoil, it's going to have leaves that are whorled around the stem, but it's not going to be as neat as the Eurasian water milfoil, where you might have a whirl of leaves at one part of the stem, and then as you go up the stem, you might have just one leaf sticking out, maybe more alternate looking along the stem. If you look at the leaves here, we have a single leaf on the right side of the picture. And the leaflets aren't as exact as Eurasian water milfoil. So you might have, you know, a little leaflet coming off that midrib one part, and you might have to go a little bit higher up on the midrib to see the next leaflet come out. Also, the leaves have more of a tapered point to them, when I talked about Eurasian water milfoil, it had that blunt leaf. The variable leaf is kind of more of a taper. The stems are going to be very thick and robust. They're often a red or brown in color. So I have an example here of a very bright red stem of the variable leaf, but that'll vary depending on the lake. And then lastly, it has a very distinct flowering stalk that'll stick up above the water. So in my photo here, you have the submerged leaves are the bottom set of leaves that we see in the photo. And then the top half is that section that will stick up out of the water. And the leaves there are more of a lance shape, and they have they're serrated, so they have teeth along the edge of those leaves that stick up. Another of our invasive species that fits into our submerged category, or where we see it coming, you know, it's more of, when I say submerged, that it's coming out of the sediment and lives kind of in that water column essentially, is fanwort. And fanwort is a perennial that, at least in the Adirondacks, we tend to see it growing in deeper waters from about 4 to 18 feet. This one was a popular one in the aquarium trade. And so we think that the populations that we have in the Adirondacks, it's been found in 4 private lakes in the southeastern part of the Adirondacks. And we think that that introduction was likely a discarded aquarium. This one also tends to spread by fragmentation of the stem. And so here's the map of it through the state of New York. And actually the population isn't showing up here in the Adirondacks. I need to check on that, but it would be about here. But as you can see, most of the populations are in the southern part of the state. And that's because this one we thought typically could not survive in the more harsh winters of the northern part of the state. But we've been found to be wrong about that, apparently. So to identify fanwort, this one has, as you can imagine from the name, these beautiful fan-shaped leaves to them. And it has 2 leaves that are opposite each other on the stem. So as you can see, both in the picture and the photo, you have a set of leaves that are opposite each other. With this one, you'll see that the leaves have a stalk to them. So you'll have the stem will have a stalk, and then you'll see the fan sticking up. And so that'll be important when I talk about one of the natives that looks very similar. Also, the leaves, the fans, are arranged as they branch. So they'll have multiple branchings that make up the leaf. And so this one does have a flower in some climates, but not typically in the Adirondacks. So I've talked about some of our invasive submerged plants, and so I want to just point out a few natives that might get confused with either our invasive milfoils or fanwort. Often we see coontail, one of our natives, in a lot of our lakes here in the Adirondacks. And so coontail kind of looks like it has, you know, it kind of has that feathery look like a milfoil does. But if you take a closer look at the leaves, which are positioned in whorls around the stem, you'll see that the leaves just are these little forks. So they tend to only branch once, and they're they might branch once or twice, and they're just going to be these little forks of leaf that are in a whorl. Another one that often gets misidentified with milfoils is called bladderwort. And we have about 8 or 9 varieties, I think, of native bladderworts in the Adirondacks. But what gives this one its name, and it also helps with identification, is that you look somewhere on the stem for a little bladder. And so here's a magnified view of what the bladder looks like. And this plant is really cool because it's actually carnivorous. And these bladders, what they do is they'll pump all the water out of the bladder, and so make a little vacuum. And then they have a little trigger hair to these bladders. And if something like a little crustacean or zooplankton swims by, or I guess other insect swims by and triggers these trigger hairs, all of a sudden they'll suck in the water that's at the opening. And along with that will come the little insect. And so then they would slowly decompose in the bladder and provide nutrients to the plant. We also have a handful of native milfoils that can be confused with our invasives. With these native milfoils, it can be a little bit more of a challenge to tell it apart from our invasives because you will have that feather-shaped leaf to it. However, a lot of our native milfoils tend to be more stiff when you take them out of the water. Both the Eurasian water milfoil and the variable leaf will tend to kind of just be limp and collapsed around the stem, where the native milfoils will be more stiff when you pull them out of the water. You can also look at the number of leaflets that are on each leaf. With Eurasian water milfoil, it tends to have 12 or more leaflets. It'll have a lot of the leaflet pairs, where the natives will have much fewer. I know with these native milfoils, it can sometimes be a challenge. So I would just, I just say if you come across a milfoil and you're not sure, you can always send photos to either Kathy or Maggie or myself, and we'll help with identification of those native or potentially native milfoils. And I'll talk more about how to do that in a little bit. Lastly, one of our natives, the water marigold, looks very similar to fanwort. So if you can tell in the photo, it's a bit hard to see here, but it has 2 leaves that are opposite each other on the stem that branch like fanwort does. But what you need to look for is whether or not there is that stem that stalk that connects the stem to the leaf. If you have a stalk, that could be your fanwort. If there's no stalk, that's water marigold. And then also water marigold creates a little yellow flower that sticks up out of the water. That's where it gets its name from, I think, where the fanwort doesn't typically produce a flower. So switching back to our invasive species, I'm going to talk about some of the floating ones, or the ones that will be sitting on the surface of the water that you might encounter. So water chestnut is one that tends to prefer primarily slow-moving waters, or it might be in bays. It creates a large, dense canopy, as you saw in that photo earlier, that shades out natives. And this one's a little bit different in that it's an annual that comes back from seeds. And so this is one that we can manage not easily, but with more success, because if we do hand harvest before it produces that seed, we can slowly knock back the population. Here's the map of it throughout the state. So you can see it's pretty widespread throughout the state at this point, but we have just a few populations in the Adirondacks. For identification of water chestnut, you see here in the photo at the top are the leaves that would be sitting at the surface of the water. And then it has a stem that goes down and has submerged leaves underneath it that would be throughout the water column. So of the leaves that are sitting at the top of the water, we call that a rosette. And if you take a closer look at the leaves, they're triangular in shape, and they have pretty exaggerated teeth on the edge of the leaf. These create, as I mentioned, a seed that's pretty unique looking. Here's a photo of the seed, and it has 4 spikes to it that are very, very sharp, and they even have a little hook to them. So they tend to get stuck on a lot of different things. So I know our boat stewards see them often on that carpeted trailer, or they can get stuck to potentially geese feathers or animals or other, fishing equipment potentially. So we see those nutlets showing up in a lot of places. And then lastly, what you want to look at too for this plant is if you pick the plant up out of the water and you look underneath it and you look at the stems of those floating leaf parts, they have these air bladders that help hold the plant to the surface of the water. And so that's a pretty unique characteristic as well. Another floating invasive that we see is European frogbit. So this one was an escaped cultivar out of, it was essentially planted in Canada and has escaped and is slowly coming south and east, which you'll see in the map that I'll show in a minute. This one tends to spread by fruit, or it has turions or little overwintering buds that can also spread and grow into new plants, and then also fragmentation. And this is one too that we think is being spread through waterfowl. So I think it's one that might be more likely to show up in some backcountry waters. Here's a map of the distribution throughout the state. So as you can see, there's a lot more of it found on the western part of the state and has kind of been coming east and south. To identify European frogbit, it has pretty small leaves. I would say maybe up to like a 50-cent piece in size. It has a nice, beautiful heart-shaped floating leaf to it, and it produces little 3-petaled white flowers that have a yellow center. If you were to flip the leaf upside down and look at the underside, its veins are gonna follow that heart shape to it. And that's pretty distinct as well. Also with this plant, it grows into a dense tangle of stems. So if you were to try to pull up just one plant, it's really hard to do. Typically, when you pull up one plant, it's gonna bring a whole lot of plants with it in this large tangle. And as you can see, you can kind of see the size of the leaf compared to the hand there. We also have an invasive called yellow floating heart. This one, the only population that I know of in the Adirondacks is in Lake Champlain, and it's a pretty small population currently. For yellow floating heart, it has a heart-shaped leaf that has a wavy edge to the leaf. So you can kind of see in this photo the wavy edge, and it's a relatively small leaf to it. It has a yellow flower that's extended on a thin, long petiole. That's pretty distinctive, the flower when it is flowering. And then also the underside of the leaf is going to be a purplish in color. So some of the native lookalikes that you might encounter out on the water are the white water lily, which is pretty much, it's in a lot of places. It has a relatively large leaf that it'll produce that has a cut out of it that I always say it kind of looks like a Pac-Man. And then it produces these distinctive, beautiful white or pink flowers. And so that's our native white water lily. If you were to look at the veins of the white water lily, the veins are going to be coming out of where the stem is attached, and they're going to be more net-like. Or maybe if you think about on your, like the lines on the palm of your hand is what the whitewater lily is going to look like. Another native floater that we see a lot of places is the yellow pond lily, or another native name would be spatterdock. And so this produces floating leaves, some that are really big and sometimes small, depending on the species. And it's more of a football shape or an oblong shape with a cutout on one edge of that football side. It produces yellow flowers that are more, I kind of think they're like tulip in look, potentially. Let's see. Another native floater that you'll likely encounter, I think I see water shield in pretty much every lake that I go in the Adirondacks. This one is a kind of football shaped leaf again in size, but they don't get more to, any bigger than this, I would say. It's going to have a stem coming out of the center of the leaf. And if it produces this interesting jelly-like covering both on the underside of the leaf as well as on the stem. And that jelly layer helps protect it from insects and is a very distinctive characteristic to water shield. Lastly, we do have a native little floating heart, which might look like that yellow floating heart. But with the little floating heart, they produce a yellow flower, or not a yellow, sorry, a white flower. And unlike our yellow floating heart, which is our invasive species. And with our little floating heart, if you pull up one of the leaves, you'll see that it has these little, they're kind of like rhizomes, or kind of like little roots that stick out just a little bit below the surface of the water, where the yellow floating heart doesn't have those. So next I'll talk about our one invasive pondweed, curly leaf pondweed. This one's a bit different from our other aquatic plants in that it grows rapidly in cold water. It usually starts growing in the spring underneath the ice, and then it'll reach to its most, highest abundance in June and might start dying back mid-July. I do see it in some waters throughout the season, but it won't be as a high abundance later in the summer. And so this one creates an overwintering bud, or turion, which is the photo on the bottom left that you're seeing. It kind of is like a little pine cone. And so this is how it grows back every year from those little turions or pine cones. And you might see those later in the summer floating on the surface of the water. And so they kind of just float around until they find a new place to sink down and root. So curly leaf pondweed is in about 20 lakes in the Adirondacks. I think it might be more widespread than that. It's just that people aren't out when it's at its high abundance to report it as often. And as you can see throughout the state of New York, it's pretty widespread. For identification of curly leaf pondweed, what's distinctive with pondweeds is the alternate leaves on the stem. So as I mentioned, with alternate leaves, you have one leaf coming off one side of the stem, and then you go up the stem a little bit, and the leaf will come off the other side, and it goes back and forth like that. The plant can grow to be about 12 to 16 feet deep in water. It grows on a subsediment runner. So you'll see, you might see one plant come up, and then in a little distance, you'll see another plant come up and kind of in a line like that because it's growing off these runners. The leaves are kind of a finger shape or oblong where it has, the nice straight edges and then a rounded tip to it. And it has a distinctive lasagna-like look to it. So here's some photos where the edges are tightly waved. And they'll have tiny, tiny teeth on the edges of the leaves, which are hard to see in this photo. But if you were to have some curly leaf pondweed and you were to look, you might need a magnifying glass, or you might need to hold it up to the sun, and you would see these tiny little teeth on the edge. We do have some native pondweeds that can look very similar to curly leaf pondweed. I want to say we have like over 20 native pondweed species, but there are a few that are very similar looking. They're the clasping leaf pondweed and the white stem pondweed. And so as you can see from these photos, they do, the leaves will look a little wavy like the curly leaf pondweed. But what I typically would recommend looking for then is, the overall shape of the leaf. So with these native pondweeds, they have more of a lance shape. So they'll kind of slowly come to a tip, where the curly leaf pondweed is more like shaped like a finger, where you have the straight sides and then a little bit of a curved end to it. And then also I would look for the edge of the leaf for those tiny little teeth. I did want to mention starry stonewort. It's not on those lists that I had at the beginning, but it is one that I wanted people to be aware of, to keep an eye out for. It's not known to be in the Adirondacks, but it's up in the St. Lawrence River. It was first reported in the St. Lawrence River in 1978, and is in some of our lakes like Oneida Lake in the Erie Canal to the west. As you can see from the distribution on IMAP invasives, it's mostly to the west of us. And with starry stonewort, it's actually not an aquatic plant, it's a macroalgae. And we have some native macroalgae that I'll talk about called Cara and Nutella. But with this macroalgae, it'll tend to grow in these dense masses that are more in shallow waters. We see it, and it might be more at the bottom of the lake, closer to the sediment. And with starry stonewort, what you want to look for are these tiny little rhizoids. So you can see it in someone's hand there on the bottom photo. And here's a magnified photo of it. And they create these little star-shaped rhizoids, which you would want to look for. The natives that might be confused with the starry stonewort are Cara or muskgrass. And so if you pull this out of the water, you're going to know it because it has this really musky smell to it. Or the Nutella might also look like the starry stonewort, where it has all these different little branching pieces that come off of the plant. But again, what you're going to want to look for are those little white stars that are in the starry stonewort. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on how to identify hydrilla, which is our watch species that we're worried might come to the Adirondacks, and we want everyone on high alert for it. And so this one again makes these large masses of plant growth. It's known to be in, I think, 20 to 25 lakes in the state of New York. And there's a lot of work being done at many of these locations to try to eradicate these populations. We have had it show up on a few boats that have come to the Adirondacks, but we don't know of any established populations. For identification of hydrilla, I have here both hydrilla, our potential invasive, as well as our native Elodea or Elodia, because they can look very similar. And so I want to highlight, as I talk about identification of hydrilla, how you tell it from our native Elodea. So hydrilla has these lance-shaped leaves. And with hydrilla, you're going to see the leaves in whorls of typically more than 4 or more leaves, where our native lookalike, Elodea, tends to only have 3 leaves. It might have 4, but usually we just see it in groups of 3. The edge of the leaf of hydrilla is going to have tiny teeth to it, as well as little spines on the midrib, where our native Elodea has a smooth edge to the leaf and no spines. Lastly, hydrilla creates these tubers in the sediment, or these tiny little potato-like structures. So if you do pull up a plant that you're wondering, is this hydrilla? Look around in the sediment a little bit for these tiny little tubers. Hydrilla will have the tubers. Our native Elodea will not have them. And so I know a lot of the materials that you'll be getting after this training also will have these identification, or a lot of different identification materials to help tell the natives and invasives apart. So with that, that was the aquatic invasive plants. And I know that was a lot of information at you. As I mentioned, we'll have some different materials for you after this training. And also, I don't expect you to be, experts on this at all. It's more to give you an idea of what to keep an eye out for and what might be a problem. And I'll always come to myself or to Kathy or to Maggie to help with identification. And with that, I'll pause. And Maggie, has there been any questions that have popped up in the chat?
No questions yet.
Okay, wonderful. And if you have questions, feel free to type them in now. Otherwise, we'll also have an opportunity at the end to ask. And if no questions, I will move on to aquatic invasive animals. I'm not going to spend much time on the animals because a lot of the survey protocols that we'll have you do focus on plants. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the animals just to let you know what might potentially be a problem that you should keep an eye out for. So I'll start first with our water flea, which is our invasive zooplankton in the area. We have it in 10 or 11 water bodies in the Adirondacks at this point. And it's a tiny crustacean that floats in the water column. We tend to find it in the deeper waters of lakes. They tend to like large, deep, cold waters. We tend to find them in, lake trout lakes, essentially. With spiny water flea, they are visible to the naked eye, but they're very small. So on the bottom left here, you see a photo of spiny water flea on my pinky nail. And they're clear, but they are very colorful in that you'll see blues and oranges in their body structure. They have two ways that they reproduce. They'll reproduce asexually through the summer, so they'll create little clones of themselves that are in this back pouch here in this photo. And so their populations can grow exponentially throughout the summer. And so we tend to see the greatest numbers of water flea in the fall or late summer. And then they'll also, in the fall, produce sexually and create little resting eggs, which you see in the pouch on the back of the spiny water flea in the upper left photo there. And typically, we'll get the first reports of spiny water flea from anglers because they'll get caught on the fishing lines of people if they're running their fishing lines through the water. The spines of the spiny water flea will get caught on the fishing lines, and so they'll look like little globs along the fishing line, or like maybe little wet cotton, if wet cotton had gotten caught on the fishing line. And so the spine, how you identify them is typically these long spines that they have, which is distinctive to their name. For impacts of spiny water flea, they have a few different ones. The main one, though, is their impact on the food web. So the spiny water flea will eat native zooplankton of similar size, and this native zooplankton is a very important food source for a lot of our young fish and forage fish. And so they take away that food source, and we see impacts, or not as healthy, larger fish in the population. It can also have impacts in the opposite direction, where if it's eating our native zooplankton, these zooplankton tend to eat phytoplankton, which is algae. So if we take away our zooplankton, we might see increases in algae, which would affect the clarity, essentially, of our lakes. We also see impacts to angling, potentially, as they gum up the fishing lines. As you reel in, you can't reel it in as fast, and you might lose fish in that way. We also have another invasive zooplankton fishhook water flea, which has only been found in Lake Champlain so far. And so here, the photo on the right is the spiny water flea on the bottom, and then the fishhook water flea on the top. And so they're very similar looking. They have very similar impacts to the native systems. And we think that the main way that both fishhook and spiny water flea can be spread is likely on fishing gear, on angling gear as they get caught up on them, as well as potentially in little pockets of water on equipment. Next, I'm going to talk about zebra mussels, which is a small bivalve or mollusk. They tend to get about an inch in length. They will range in their coloring, but usually they'll have these stripes that get their that look like zebra stripes, so zebra mussels in name. They have these byssal threads, which is this photo in the top right. You'll see these threads that come out of the bottom of the shell. And these are what helps them connect to any hard surfaces. They kind of get those threads wound into the hard surfaces, and they almost seem like they're cemented onto things. And so they'll attach to any hard surface. So my example there is, a cart that's covered in zebra mussels. We also see the shells, as the individuals die, the shells get washed up on shore and cause a lot of issues with, they tend to be kind of sharp, so they can cut people if they're trying to walk along the beach in bare feet. The impacts of zebra mussels are many. They are very effective filter feeders. So they'll be filtering the water and taking out the algae out of the water column, which is essentially the base of the food chain for our lakes. Also, as they're filtering the algae out, they change the water clarity. And so we can see changes in, if you have more clear water, the thermocline in the lake will drop. And so it reduces the amount of deep cold water habitat that we need for our cold water fisheries. We also see increases in aquatic plant growth with the changes in clarity. As I mentioned, zebra mussels like to attach to anything hard, so they'll also attach to our native mussels and will eventually kill them if there's enough zebra mussels attached to them. Then we also have the issues of the shells showing up on the beaches. And then they'll also fill in water intakes for our industries, and essentially fill up those pipes with their shells, and then have to be cleaned out, and is very costly to try to keep zebra mussels out of those freshwater intakes. I will mention with zebra mussels, part of their life cycle is that their young are these tiny little free-floating, they're called veligers. And so they'll release these tiny young that just float in the water column. And so those little veligers can potentially get moved around in little pockets of water. And then zebra mussels can also, attach to any hard surface. So if a boat is in a water for long enough, they can attach to the boat and get moved around in that way. They also will attach to aquatic plants. So if you think about, that boat that I showed earlier, any of those plants could have zebra mussels attached to them also. I will just tack on one of our watch species, quagga mussels, to this identification. Again, quagga mussels aren't known to be in the Adirondacks, but they are in other parts of New York State. And so how you tell quagga mussels from zebra mussels, because they look very similar, is on the left here, I have zebra mussels on the top and quagga mussel on the bottom. And if you look on the lateral view of zebra mussels, they have a flat bottom to them. So you can essentially set them on their side and they'll stay standing up, where quagga mussels have a rounded bottom. So if you were to try to stand quagga mussels up, they would just roll right over. Also, on the photo here on the right, we have zebra mussels on the left and quagga mussels on the right. And zebra mussels have a pretty clear hole or groove where those byssal threads come out. Quagga mussels also have those byssal threads, so they will have that little hole on the bottom. But if you look to see, the line across where the two shells come together, zebra mussels have a symmetrical line across, and quagga mussels will have more of an asymmetrical or curved line where those shells come together. Next, I wanted to talk about Asian clams. We have one population of Asian clams in the Adirondacks in Lake George. And we haven't seen it moved to any other waters, but we keep an eye out for it for sure. It tends to like sandy substrates. So if you come across any sandy parts of a pond, definitely just keep an eye on those sandy areas looking for any Asian clam shells. I have in this photo here on the left, Asian clams with some different native mussels and some different snails, so you can kind of see how it compares. The Asian clams, at least our population in Lake George, are pretty small. They tend to not get any larger than a quarter, but the shell itself is going to be very strong. If you were to try to break it in your hand, you wouldn't be able to do that. We have some native fingernail clams that can be very similar in size, but the shells are a lot more delicate looking. With Asian clams, they also have very distinct rings to them, which you can kind of see in this photo in the upper right corner. But if you were to run your fingernail along those ridges, it would almost feel like corduroy. They're so strong of a ridge. They're going to be tan or brown in color, and then on the inside they're going to have some purples likely and white and a beautiful shine to them. The impacts of Asian clams are very similar to zebra mussels because they're also very good filter feeders. So they're going to filter out that good algae and not leave a lot of food for other native species. They also will get stuck in intakes of water industry, the water intakes, and bog those down. And then also the shells can litter the bottom of the lake and also the beaches. Next, I wanted to touch on Chinese mystery snails because this might be one that might show up more often in some of our backcountry waters. They're a large brown snail, so you can see them in a hand here on the right. I don't know of any natives that get to that size. They're going to be a large dark brown snail, and they have no perculum or a trap door. So that's what you're seeing covering the opening of the shells on the photo of the right is that trap door. For Chinese mystery snails, we know of them to be in about 20 lakes. I think they're more widespread because they're just not getting reported as often. So if you come across something like this, definitely report it to us because I'll be interested to figure out if it is a Chinese mystery snail or not. The impacts of Chinese mystery snails are not as well known. They graze along the surface of like rocks and sand, and they're taking off that algae that's growing. So they're likely removing food for our native snails. Also, they will have some die-offs. So you might get large numbers of Chinese mystery snails dying and getting brought into shore, and they're pretty stinky. Lastly, I wanted to touch on rusty crayfish, which is one of our watch species. So it's not known to be in the Adirondacks yet. It's likely in Lake Champlain, but we don't know of it in inland waters. And so it's an invasive crayfish. It has a distinctive reddish or rust-colored spots on the side of its body. It's almost as if somebody had dipped their fingers in red paint and then picked up the crayfish. It also has little black bands on the tips of its claws. And often if you see it, you're gonna see a lot of them. They reach really high abundances. And the impacts that we see with rusty crayfish are they're kind of like little lawnmowers where they walk along and they kind of cut aquatic plants. So on the right here was an experiment that was done where it was a lake that had a lot of these rusty crayfish in them. And what they were seeing was relatively few aquatic plants growing throughout the lake. The upper of the top photo, the upper left photo, shows an exclusion or a little barrier across the middle there. So on the top, we have a lot of aquatic plants growing because the rusty crayfish can't get in there, but we have no aquatic plants where the rusty crayfish had access. But what the study did was it intensively removed rusty crayfish out of this lake. And after a significant amount of the crayfish had been removed, they started seeing a lot of aquatic plants coming back. And so with the rusty crayfish, it historically was removed or was moved around the landscape, but as a bait for fishing. And so on occasion, the boat stewards will see it pop up in bait buckets because people are intending to fish with it. So with that, that was my last ID. And again, I know it's a lot of information, but we'll provide you with some different outreach materials to help with identification. Maggie, any questions?
Not that I see. I think you're good to keep going.
Okay, so my last section here is to touch a little bit on some of the monitoring techniques that you'll use out in the field. And so I will just provide some of it, and then Kathy and Maggie will be following up with more information about reporting after you do your survey. So with the monitoring techniques, we ask that people do their surveys for invasive species sometime mid-July to mid-September. And so we have that time scale because that's usually when our aquatic plants will be at their highest abundance. And they'll also have some, they'll be flowering, or they'll have seeds that tend to help with identification. Also, it's best to do a survey when you have a nice, calm, sunny day. It's when you're going to want to be out on the water the most, right? And also with that calm and that sun, you'll be able to see into the water a lot better and potentially see aquatic plants growing. With equipment lists, there's some different things that we recommend you use when you go out to do your survey, but not all of them are needed. So I'll just touch on a few things. Ideally, you'll have some way to get out onto the water, whether that's a pack raft or a canoe or a kayak. It's easiest if you can be on the water just to see what's going on out there, but it's not necessary. You could also potentially do a survey from the shoreline. Also, if you have a map of the lake or pond that you're planning to survey, it helps. It's not required, but it helps just kind of know where you are on the lake. And, if you come across anything that you're worried about, you could potentially mark it on the map. Ignore the data sheets because Kathy will be talking about the reporting that we do with IMAP for this project. I have paper towels and Ziploc bags on this list because if you come across a plant that you're not sure about identification, what you can do is you can save a piece of that plant and bring it back with you to send photos to us to help with identification. So what you do is you would get that paper towel a little bit damp. We don't want it soaking wet. We just want a little bit of moisture, and put it in the plastic bag or the Ziploc bag with your plants that you're wondering about, and just tuck those in the shade or in a cooler to save for later. And then I have masking tape and labels and pens to mark that plant sample to just keep information about where you found it, the date you found it, etc. I have a jar or a baggie for floating plants on this list because as I was talking about different characteristics for identification, it is a lot easier to look for those characteristics if you're floating the plant in water. So that's just to help with ID. Also, I have a rake with a rope attached on this list, and I have a photo of what that might look like, or Kathy had some great smaller rakes that are easier to carry into more remote waters. And what this helps with is essentially, if you don't know, if you're wondering, there might be aquatic plants growing below me, but I can't see them, you can use these aquatic rakes to help get a sample of plants. So essentially what you do is you would throw the rake over the side of the boat, about 5 feet, we say. Let it sink to the bottom of the lake, and then you'd pull it slowly back using the rope, and then you would see what kinds of plants might be attached to the rake. I also have polarized sunglasses on this list because the polarized sunglasses will help cut the glare of the sun on the surface of the water and allow you to see into the water a little bit better to see what plants are growing underneath you. I have a plant guide on there, which will be providing you with a few different resources for that. I have a net on the list, and I just have that because often as you're boating along, you might see some floating plant fragments. And you can use the net to quickly grab those just to take a look to see what's there. A small ruler or magnifying glass might help with identification. I have a view scope on this list, which is that photo on the bottom right. You're seeing someone use a view scope. They're definitely, if you're hiking into a water, you might not want to bring a view scope with you. But it's pretty interesting to boat with because essentially it's a clear bottom on this funnel. So you get a magnified view of what's going on underneath the water. And it's pretty amazing. And then lastly, I have a camera on there if you want to take photos when you're out on the water. If you find a plant that you might want help with identification of, you can take photos of that plant and send them to Kathy, Maggie, and I to help with identification. And then I have a cooler on that list. Again, if you collect a plant sample, it's best if you put it in a cooler. It'll help keep it cold and make it last longer, but not needed if you don't have room for the cooler. To talk a little bit about the protocol when out on a lake, what we recommend is that you do a meander survey. So what that looks like is that you're going to zigzag back and forth along the shore, the shallows of the lake. And so what you want to cover is try to cover where you think aquatic plants are growing. So we try to go as close to shore as possible and then out to about 15 feet in depth, and then trying to kind of zigzag back and forth. And that 15 feet in depth is kind of an estimate. You don't necessarily know that you're at that depth, but you're just trying to cover as much of that shallow area as possible as you move along, looking for any aquatic plants or other invasive species. Some good places to focus your attention, which I know some of these you won't have on a backcountry water, but just to highlight those for you, would be to look at any inlets and outlets where you might have things being introduced. If there's any sort of access point, again, that's where people might bring an invasive species by accident, where it might, be introduced. Beaches where you have sandy areas, you might have Asian clams. If you see existing native plant beds, those are obviously good places for plants to grow. So you want to look for also invasive species there. And then lastly, if there's a downwind shore that you can identify, as plants, as the summer goes on, fragments of plants will break off, and so the wind will push those to certain shores, and it's a good place to look for invasives. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on, if you find a plant that you're not sure about and you've collected a sample, the best way to try to get an identification is first to try to take a photo of it to send to Kathy, Maggie, and myself. And the best photos are ones that if you can float it in a Tupperware container or something, again, we can better see the different parts of the plant if it's floating in water. Also try to have a white background. So my photo here, I have a clear Tupper container on a white piece of paper, but any way that you can get that white background is helpful. And then also including something in the photo for scale. So for example, here I have a ruler. You might want to put a coin or a key, just something to help tell scale. And then you'll want to include photos that are of the complete plant piece that you have. And then if you see any seeds or flowers, or if you have, you might have hydrilla and you have one of those little tubers, you take photos of those different characteristics to help with identification. And then you would just keep that plant sample in your fridge in a Ziploc bag. Send us the photos. If we can't tell from the photos what it is, we might ask you for that plant piece. And then lastly, I just want to remind everyone, as you leave a water, make sure that we're not the ones spreading invasive species if we're visiting a lot of different lakes. So make sure that you inspect your equipment, your boat, remove any attached plants or animals or mud, drain any water from it, and then if possible, let your equipment dry for at least 5 days. If you're not going to have 5 days between when you visit the next lake, try to take it to one of the boat wash stations. They'll happily wash canoes and kayaks along with the motorized boats. And so with that, that's my part of the presentation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If not, I think I'll let Kathy speak, but I think it'll be a break time if there's no questions at this point.
Great, thank you so much, Erin. That was awesome. I always learn new things or things that I've forgotten from the year before. So I just really appreciate you always helping us with this part of the project. And like Erin said, don't feel overwhelmed with all of that information. You might be thinking, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to remember all of that stuff. But it's just to give you an idea, and you'll have resources to take with you. And even if you don't end up going to a backcountry pond, if you're just relaxing and enjoying a lake or pond in the front country, you still can keep an eye out for these invasives. And if you see something, you'll have resources to take pictures, and you can contact us and let us know what you found if you suspect something. So again, just feel free to watch this video again, and it's just a lot of fun to learn these plants and also learn about the natives that we're trying to protect as you're spending time on the water. So why don't we, it's pretty close to 11, why don't we come back at 10 after 11. So 11:10 we'll start back up. So let's all take a break and do what we need to do, and then we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Oh, what did you say, Maggie?
I'm restarting the recording. I had paused it, but
Oh, okay, great.
we're good to go.
Just give everyone another minute. Okay, so we'll get started again, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of the Backcountry Water Monitors project, and then we'll hear from Maggie about survey outings and Leave No Trace, and then we'll finish up with showing you how to fill out the Survey 123 SAS Pro form. So the Backcountry Water Monitor project started in 2015, and we are now in our 6th season, having worked with 132 volunteers and participants and conducted 82 surveys in the Lake Champlain Basin of the Adirondack Park. And so you'll notice on the map on the screen that all of those stars, which represent ponds that have been surveyed, and all of those little green pond marks are on the eastern side of the park, and that's because this project's focusing only on the Lake Champlain Basin. And the project is funded by the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission. We've had a number of partners over the years, and you can see the partner logos there at the bottom of the screen, but we work very closely with APIP and the Nature Conservancy, which is who Erin works for, as well as the New York Natural Heritage Program, who develops and manages New York IMAP invasives and the survey app and form that we'll be using. And we also work with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Bureau of Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health, and scientists from that bureau come out with us in the field every year, at least once a year. Backcountry Water Monitor Project focuses on having volunteers like you be involved in early detection. And Erin was talking about how important early detection is, and I think that's one of the really exciting things about this program is that we get out and are able to potentially find invasives when we can still do something about it and protect these beautiful waters that we love so much and care so much about. A really important stage in combating invasive species is early detection, because in backcountry areas, you're likely to find just one or a few plants when there's still a really good chance to eradicate the invasive from the lake or pond. So Erin went through most of these plants, and primarily we focus on these 10, but of course, when you're out on the water, if you see any of the species, and like the animal species that Erin spoke of, that are invasive, we of course want to report those, but the ones that we've primarily been focusing on, because we might find them in backcountry waters, or if they make their way into backcountry waters, they really could cause a lot of problems there, is Brazilian elodea, brittle naiad, curly-leafed pondweed, water chestnut, Eurasian water milfoil, hydrilla, yellow floating heart, variable leaf water milfoil, European frogbit, and fanwort. And we heard about most of those from Erin. To date, the project has identified 5 occurrences of invasive species, 4 of Eurasian water milfoil, and 1 of frogbit. And all of these, all of the ponds that these were discovered in are probably not what you would think of as backcountry ponds, more front country ponds, but because they were close to roadways and urban areas. And all but 1 had a boat launch. And you'll see in the map there to the left, the orange stars indicate the ponds in which we found an invasive. So the Backcountry Water Monitor Project involves collecting data about the invasive species that you find in surveys in the Survey 123 mobile app using the SAS Pro form. And if you looked at the homework slides, you will have done some work to get to the point where you would have downloaded the SAS Pro form. And the data that volunteers collect on the ponds is then uploaded immediately into an online map. And we'll be giving you a link to that map so you can have a look at that. And ideally, find a pond that you might want to survey that's marked with a yellow dot and do a survey this year. And then subsequently at the end of the season, all that data that comes from our Survey 123 mobile apps and our SAS Pro forms that has been uploaded into our project map will then go into IMAP invasives. And IMAP invasives is New York State's online all-taxa invasive species database and mapping tool. The comprehensive database tool can be used for documenting and sharing invasive species observations, surveys, assessments, and treatment data, coordination of early detection and rapid response efforts through email alerts, and data analysis and summaries in the web interface in GIS. And there's really a lot that you can do with IMAP invasives that we're not going to be covering in this webinar. But if you go to the site and look at their resources, there's also a mobile app you can use in IMAP invasives. It's a great tool, and you really should explore it more beyond what we're doing today. An optional app that we're not requiring for you to use, but it's really helpful with identification of all types of species, native species and non-native species, is iNaturalist. And we've started an informal project in iNaturalist where when we've been out on the ponds the last couple of years, we'll upload the native species that we're finding, as well as some of the few invasives that we've found. So you can use iNaturalist to help you. It could be one of the tools that you use when you're out on the ponds trying to figure out what plant is what, you can use iNaturalist. So it's a really handy tool, and we'll be sending you a link to that Backcountry Pond project in iNaturalist, in our follow-up email. Maggie Newell, who is ADK's Backcountry Water Monitor trip leader, will be telling you about the guided outings that we offer this year. Ideally, before you go out on your own survey to one of the ponds, you would participate in one of our guided outings. And usually we do this and practice the survey protocol at Heart Lake when we have our trainings there, but of course we weren't able to do that this year. So this year, if you are able, please sign up for one of our guided outings, and links to the outings will be on the links page in the Dropbox that we're going to share with you in the follow-up email. If for some reason the dates we have those trips scheduled for don't work for you, you're not able to go on one of those, let us know, and we'll work with you to go out with you on your own and find a pond that we can survey with you. So, if you look at that list, you're like, I can't make any of those dates, don't let that put you off. Let us know, and we'll help you out. After you've been on a survey, or if you already have experience with aquatic invasive species, you are welcome to borrow our survey equipment. And if you look at the photo there that was taken on our living room floor, I have all of our equipment that goes with this project sort of packed up, and I threw my boot in there for scale. But we have inflatable pack rafts, the rake that Aaron was talking about. We have a smaller version of that so that you can pack that in without carrying 20 extra pounds with you. And we have packable paddles as well. So all of that equipment, after you've taken a guided hike with us, if you want to go out on your own and borrow that equipment, and you have a friend that can go with you, so you're not out there by yourself on the water. And we also have PFDs. I don't have that in photo, but you're welcome to borrow the equipment and go out and survey ponds on your own. And we'll be looking later at our online map. You can use that online map to find a pond that you're comfortable with exploring. And again, there's lots of options. Certainly we don't want you to choose a pond that takes 10 miles to get to, 10 miles of hiking to get to, if you're really not comfortable doing a 20-mile hike round trip or spending the night in the backcountry. There's lots of options, and we can help you find something that you're comfortable with that fits your skill level and your experience. So that's just a really brief overview of the project. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to Maggie?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'll take a minute to type them if you'd like while I start my screen share.
Oh, they're in the chat?
There are none in the chat, but if anyone has one,
oh, okay.
We have a moment while we're switching over. Well, if we have no questions, I can go ahead and start on this next section. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Leave No Trace. We love to teach Leave No Trace. It's a lot of what we do. And in all our activities, we like to share messages of responsible recreation. And a lot of this may be second nature to some of you, but I'll try to run through it fairly quickly. I could talk about Leave No Trace all day, but I'll keep this briefer. Leave No Trace is the national standard for outdoor ethics. It's ways we can minimize our impacts while we are recreating outdoors. There are 7 principles, and the first principle is plan ahead and prepare. So I work a lot with 4th graders, and we love hand signals. So I'm going to show you some hand signals to help remember each principle. So 1 is plan ahead and prepare. So we're living the experience in advance. We're going to look up the forecast of where we're going. We're going to leave an itinerary with someone who will know to expect when you're getting out of the woods, so that they can be that first person to say, oh, they're running a little late. And then of course you want to pack a lot of extra things. So we have the 10 essentials. On a hot day in the summer, a lot of times it feels like we may just need water and a snack, but being more prepared helps us to plan for, if anything, if we have to be out a little longer, you can stay comfortable and handle that situation. So the 10 essentials are first, navigation. So there are lots of different apps and GPSs that folks use. If you use one of those, that's awesome. We do encourage folks to also bring a paper map with them and a compass, because in case the technology takes a dip. Sun protection for while you're out on the ponds and lakes is critical. Insulation, so packing some extra layers, just in case you had to be out longer, you want to make sure you can stay comfortable. Illumination, I always hike with a headlamp so that in case you're out longer than you think, you can still get out of the woods easily. A first aid kit. Fire would mean a lighter or matches, just a good thing to have in your first aid kit or with your emergency stuff. Repair kit and tools. This can be as simple as a pocket knife and some tape wrapped around your water bottle. But just if you had a boot malfunction is what I see the most, that it's helpful to have tape to, if your lace breaks or something like that. Nutrition, you want to have food with you. Hydration, of course, water. And on longer trips, it's always a great idea to have a filter or chemical treatment so you can treat more water. Emergency shelter, a lot of folks hike with those tiny emergency blankets, space blanket type thing, just so if you did have to be out overnight, you could stay comfortable. And then this is not one of the 10 essentials, but having a trowel and toilet paper is always helpful if you need to use a bathroom while you're recreating. So plan ahead and prepare is just thinking through everything you may need while you're on your adventure, going over your trip so that you can have a successful adventure. All right, our second principle, 2, is travel and camp on durable surfaces. So we have our little man, and we're gonna travel and camp on durable surfaces. So one specific consideration for the backcountry water monitoring is to choose your launching spot carefully. When you're picking where to launch your boat, just to aim for somewhere that doesn't have a lot of vegetation. We want to avoid trampling vegetation while getting in and out of the water. Most sites you'll be launching have a pretty easy spot where people go in and out of the water, but if you're somewhere that doesn't have that, looking for rocks to stand on is always a great idea. While hiking, you should hike in the center of the trail and walk through any mud or puddles, so instead of walking around them and potentially widening the trail. And if you are going out overnight, camping in designated sites whenever possible to concentrate our impacts at already impacted sites. All right, 3 is dispose of waste properly. So we have our 3 fingers, and this is going to be my trowel. So I'm digging a cat hole, 3 fingers for 3, dispose of waste properly. So first, with any garbage or anything you bring in, pack it back out. It's a very common phrase. While you're recreating, if there's a privy available or a restroom at the trailhead, use those when available. And if not, if you have to poop, you should dig a cat hole. So that's why I pack my trowel to make it easier. But if you don't have a trowel, you can always use the heel of your boot. You want to go 200 feet, which is 70 adult steps away from the trail, any water, and campsites. And that's so that we minimize the impacts of potentially contaminating water and avoid human contact as well. And you're just going to dig a hole that's 6 to 8 inches deep. Do your business in the hole. You can bury your toilet paper, or you can pack it out depending on what you're comfortable with, and then cover it back up so it'll be as if you were never there. And if you do have to pee, the main impact of urine is social, so can have a smell and be unpleasant if someone walks upon you, both for them and for yourself. So again, it is best to go about 70 steps away from the trail and water. or it is okay to use the restroom to pee in large bodies of water. But for our purposes, it's easier just to head 70 steps into the woods, and with that paper, best to pack it out, I would say also, if you use toilet paper. All right, 4, leave what you find. So for 4, we're gonna do 2 fingers and 2 fingers and take a picture instead of taking out a natural object that we enjoy seeing. So leave what you find, leave your wow, beautiful natural objects you enjoy, leave them for the next visitor, or if it's cool bark or tree stumps, they're gonna decompose and fertilize the soil. And believe it or not, our work, the invasive species work, also falls under leave what you find. So you don't wanna have any hitchhikers, any invasive species attaching to your boat that you bring to other water bodies. So clean, drain, and dry. And even if you're moving for a lot from one area to another, you should be cleaning out the tread of your hiking boots after trips, because seeds can get caught in there and move from one area to another. So regularly cleaning our gear. All right. Our 5th leave no trace principle is minimize campfire impact. This may not come up as much on your backcountry water monitoring, but it is good to know. So first, you want to use designated fire rings when they're there, if you're hoping to have a fire. One impact of a big impact that fires can have is they heat up the ground and can kill the living layer of the soil. So a fire ring with a pad will be designed to mitigate those impacts, or it'll be in an already impacted spot. There's no fire ring. 1, consider alternatives. Fires can take a lot of time, and we don't always need them, but they are a lot of fun. So bringing a candle with you is a great alternative, or shining a headlamp into a Nalgene can also give off a nice glow at the end of the night, if that's what you're looking for. And of course, before you leave, make sure it is cool to the touch and completely extinguished, so that you don't, sometimes fires can smolder underground, so we want to avoid that. And use dead, down, and dinky and distant wood. So you want to use things that are already dead, because that'll burn better, far away from your campsite, and no bigger than about your wrist, because we want everything to burn completely. And if you're recreating in the high peaks or in this area, there are some spots where fires are not allowed, so just check the regulations before you head out. All right, 6 is respect wildlife. So we're gonna do 3 and 3. And these are our antlers, so we're respecting wildlife. First part of respect wildlife is to observe wildlife from a distance. We are visitors in their homes, so we want to give them their space while they're living. And a good way to think about how far away you should be, we call the rule of thumb. So if you stretch your arm straight out and try to cover the animal you're looking at with your thumb, if they're covered, you're probably far enough away. So bigger animals like a black bear, you want to be quite farther away from than smaller animals like a chipmunk that you may see around. Next way to respect wildlife is to store our food properly. We want to avoid feeding wildlife intentionally or unintentionally, because it's not good for them. So in the high peaks, if you recreate up here, you'll know that you are required to use a bear canister when out overnight. Bear canisters are a great way on overnight trips to make sure no wildlife gets into your food. But even while you're monitoring, one thing Kathy pointed out to me when we were practicing is that you should bring your food with you in the boat, because anything that's left unattended on shore for a long time, the smells will attract little critters, and it's not good for them or for you if they get into your food. And then we can also avoid wildlife during sensitive times and control pets at all times. Again, so that they can go on about their lives as normal, and we can just enjoy our day as visitors in their home. All right, and last, 7 is be considerate of other visitors. So we're gonna have 7, and we got a peace sign and a wave. So one kind of new element to be considerate of other visitors right now is to bring a face mask with you. we are not asking that you wear those while you're hiking, while you're by yourself in the woods, but there are many times where you're at a crowded trailhead or a narrow trail and others are coming to pass, and it's just now a great thing to have so that you can throw it on if it is not possible to maintain social distance. We should also yield to others on the trail just to be friendly, and that's a great way to be respectful to others and to help maintain distance, is to take a few steps off trail and let others go by. Another note, just let natural sounds prevail. We can think about the impact we could be having on other visitors, so not playing music out loud while hiking is a great way to do that, especially when in crowded areas. Which once you're out on the water, it's much easier to be distant and enjoy the natural space. All right, so that's a quick overview of the 7 Leave No Trace principles. If that's new to you, if you want to learn more about it, we do offer a myriad of Leave No Trace trainings and teach it throughout all we do. Or we have, ADK has Hiking 101 courses, Leave No Trace trainers, beginning 46 courses, and also map and compass courses, so that we have tons of opportunities to learn more about responsible recreation and get you started on your journey if you haven't spent a lot of time recreating. And a great opportunity, and that I'd be happy to share all I know with you, is if you join one of our backcountry water monitoring trips. So here is our schedule for guided trips this summer. We do have one trip that is full, our one overnight in August, but these are all the schedules. If you are wondering, they're all like a little bit different distances, and some are more remote. So please reach out and I'd be happy to talk you through what may be the right trip depending on what you're looking for. And there is a list, a link to where you can sign up to these trips in the information we will share with you. At the, in the Dropbox link, there's a list to these. So, and you can sign up on our website and they are free to attend. All right. And one last thing, I'll go through some of our COVID protocols with trips. So we cannot totally eliminate risks with any backcountry trips. That there are risks associated, and the potential risk of COVID spread cannot be totally mitigated. But our first step is informed consent. So we share our protocols with everyone so you can decide if a trip is right for you. We are having everyone sign a slip that asks if you had any symptoms, been in contact with anyone who has had symptoms, tested positive in the last 2 weeks. So that's our first step, is ensuring that folks haven't had any immediate risk since in a recent window. We've also reduced the trip capacity, so there are only four participants per trip, and we'll be physically distancing throughout. We have pack rafts, so we'll be spread out on the water. And in moments when physical distancing is not possible, we'll have everyone bring a mask so that we can do that. And then we are also increasing attention to hygiene with a focus on hands. So that in a full trip, we may switch pack rafts, but we'll have cleaning procedures for any surfaces we touch. So the paddle and the sides of the pack raft. So those are just some of the ways on the trip we'll be minimizing risk. If you are signed up for a trip or would like to sign up for a trip, I'll give you a call about a week in advance to go over everything and answer any questions you may have. And then we'll meet at a known location to sometimes the trailhead, or some of our trailheads are a little harder to find. So we'll meet at easier to find locations and travel to the trailhead together. I will distribute any gear that you need from us. And then we'll head off to our destination and spend most of the day surveying. We'll walk through the survey protocols together so that you then feel prepared if you wish to go out on your own in the future. But I'd love to have you all join me for a trip this summer. Do we have any questions on any of that?
Looks like Jen loves the finger signs, your Leave No Trace finger signs. But I don't see any other questions in the chat box.
Alrighty.
Great. Well, thanks, Maggie. And again, I learn something new every time I hear the Leave No Trace presentation or something I've forgotten. So thanks again. So now we're just going to finalize the presentation with reviewing or going through the SAS Pro form, which is the survey form that we'll be using when we're out on our survey. And again, if you haven't done the homework or you don't have the survey 1, 2, 3, don't worry about it. Just follow along the slides. I'll go through them relatively quickly, but you can go back and use the presentation, or the slides will be in the Dropbox, so you can also look at them there or give us a call. So I'm going to share.
So we do have a question come in. When going out on our own, are there particular locations that you recommend, or can we go anywhere in the region?
Great question. And first, we'd like to encourage you to, and for the project, we need you to stay within the Lake Champlain Basin. And we'll be sharing a link to the project map with our follow-up email. And on the map, we'll see an image of it at the end of this slide set. We have marked with a yellow dot on the map the ponds that are ready for a survey. And that means that either they haven't been surveyed in a very long time, or they've never been surveyed, or they haven't been surveyed within 3 years within this project. So we'll have that map available for you, and you can go in there and search through it and find a pond that's right for you. If there's a pond that doesn't appear on the map that you know of, and you think that it might be one that hasn't been surveyed in the Lake Champlain Basin, let us know, and we'll have a look at that. So great question. Okay, so I'm just going to go through these slides, and as you probably, if you looked at the slides in the homework, I've probably put more screenshots and steps than many people need, but if you're like me, I need every little thing pointed out to me, so that's how I created my slides. So anyway, we're just going to, this will take about 15 minutes, so just follow along. And if you have done your homework and you have your SAS Pro form in your survey 1, 2, 3, you can go through and do a test while we're going through the slides. Okay, so this set of slides is of the Survey 1, 2, 3 mobile app. And like I said, if you have done your homework, you'll have the SAS Pro form. So when you open Survey 1, 2, 3, you'll see an icon of the SAS Pro form. And as I'm talking about this, I'm going to be moving from the screenshot on the left to the screenshot on the right. So just we'll be starting with the screenshot on the left. So you'll select the SAS Pro form by touching it or choosing it, and this will bring up 3 options: collect, outbox, and send. From this screen, touch or choose collect, which will open the SAS Pro form. In the upper right corner, you will see stacked lines that indicate the menu. Touch or choose the stacked line and a sidebar will open. If you did your homework, you will see paste answers from favorite. Touch or choose this option and your basic data, that is your name, your IMAP invasives, person ID, which is unique to you, the ADK organization ID, which is 1217, and the Adirondack Backcountry Aquatic Invasive Species Monitoring Project ID, which is 395. That'll be your favorites that you can paste in every time you do the survey. After pasting your favorites, to get your basic data into the SAS Pro form, scroll to the very top of the form and touch or choose the map icon under Searched Polygon area. On the Searched Area Polygon, on the Searched Area Polygon screen, touch or choose the map icon at the top right on the screen menu. This will open a screen with a number of map options. If you completed your homework, you would have downloaded the map option at the very bottom of the screen, which is New York State Vector Offline Map. Touch or choose this option, then touch or choose the check in the bottom right of the screen, and it will load and be your default map for the project and work when you are in the field without connectivity. So Maggie and I discovered on our practice trip that, that we needed this offline map. So we talked to the folks at the Heritage Program, and they gave us this offline map that you now can download and have in your Survey 123. And so you'll choose that as your base map. So even when you're outside of connectivity, you'll always have a map there to use for your survey. Okay, so now back in the maps polygon screen. After choosing a map, draw a polygon or outline the area or your entire pond, the entire pond you'll be surveying. You do this by touching or choosing the polygon icon at the bottom left of the screen, and then touching the map to drop an edge of your polygon or the area that you're surveying. Continue touching the map to drop additional edges until your survey area or polygon is drawn or outlined. So basically, you're going to be outlining the pond that you're surveying by touching the screen on the edge of the pond in the map. And we don't see that here because I did it from my home, but that's basically what you're doing in this step. Oh, and just going back. And then to save the polygon, again, you have to choose in the bottom right-hand corner, that green check mark, which saves that polygon and then brings you back to the main screen. Okay, after your favorites have been pasted and your polygon or survey area has been outlined or drawn, scroll down to the form to searched area fields. Touch or choose searched area fields to open the survey questions. Type the name of the pond or lake you'll be surveying and then select answers to questions in the remainder of the section. You'll choose your water body type, if it's a lake or a pond, a bay, or a wetland. What is the substrate that forms the bottom of the pond? Is it muck, boulders, sand, or gravel? And what sort of bottom cover types do you see? Leaf pack, fallen trees, and woody debris, macrophytes, which are aquatic plants, and benthic algae, which is algae growing on the bottom of the pond or lake. And then you check all that apply, so you can have more than one answer in these questions. And you also want to note if the area has motorboats, non-motorized boats, or no boats. Indicate if you surveyed the entire pond or just did a partial survey, and which is perfectly okay. If you get out there and all of a sudden it's looking like it's going to rain, which it's really not a great idea to do a survey in the rain because you can't see into the water. So it's perfectly fine to just survey part of a pond. You just want to reflect that in the polygon that you drew, and then reflect it in the way you answer the questions. If you find an invasive species, indicate that a follow-up is needed. Otherwise, answer no. So we're just working our way down those questions. In the travel time section, add up your travel, including driving and hiking round trip, plus time spent setting up and taking down the boat and survey equipment. Make sure you add up everyone's travel time if you are in a group and if you are filling out one survey form. If you each fill out separate forms, then just indicate the travel time for yourself. For active time, indicate how much time you spent on the water doing the survey. Same goes for adding up multiple people's time. So for example, let's say you go out this Saturday with Maggie, and there's 4 of you on the trip. And if Maggie is the only person to fill out the survey form for the trip, then she's going to add up. You're all going to tell her how much time you spent driving to get to the trailhead, and then you'll see how much time it took you to hike to the pond, and you're going to add up everybody's time together because you're all spending that time, and that'll be your travel time, and it'll be a round trip. And then once you get out on the water, you'll note how much time you all spend on the water, and again multiply that by the number of people that are on the water, because we want to reflect, how much time was actually spent searching for invasives. In the comment box above the time section, write the names of surveyors whose time is recorded in the survey form. So whoever's on the trip with you, make sure in that comment section you write their names. You can write your name as well, but just so we have names of folks that were on the trip in case we need to go back and ask questions about maybe where a plant was found, if there are invasives found. Then take a beauty shot of the area. You can take it while in the form by touching or choosing the camera icon, or look for a photo on your device by using the folder icon. This should be a beauty shot of the pond, trying to get as much of the surveyed area in the photo as possible. And feel free to take lots of pictures when you're out, pictures of people doing the survey. Pictures are great. The Lake Champlain Basin Program loves to get pictures from this project. They really like the beauty of these surveys in the pictures that we give them. So please feel free to take lots of pictures and send them to us, and we'll give you photo credit. And we'd really appreciate it. Okay. The next section is survey methods. The general survey method we are using is topwater, so check that. The specific survey method is topside visual and rake toss. If you decide to have fun and snorkel too, or use a view scope, then you should check those boxes. The survey program will insist that you choose a rake toss abundance method, so choose the USACE Cornell C-SLAP NYS DEC option. But you will skip the rake toss fields unless you find an invasive species during your rake toss. If you find an invasive species by looking in the water, not using the rake, so as you're surveying the pond and zigzagging around the edge, you're going to be looking into the water. And that's going to be probably what you spend most of your time doing. And because these ponds are not always shallow, but frequently shallow, you're going to be able to see a lot of the bottom of the pond and a lot of the plants, so that you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. And so it's likely if you find an invasive, it might be that you fill out this part of the form. So you're going to use the plus sign under species detected outside of rake toss. The mobile app will grab your coordinates when you open this section. So wherever you are, it'll record your coordinates for you. Then begin to type the common name of the species you have identified until it appears as an option to choose, and then choose it. And there's also a fake species in that list that you can use if you want to test the form. Answer questions about plant distribution and cover in the survey area, and write any qualifying statements about this observation in the comments. Take a high quality photo of the species. The best way to do this is to bring a sample back home with you and pack a plastic baggie or white plastic container to float the plant in, and include something for scale. An actual scale would be ideal, but otherwise a coin or something like that will work, just like Erin was explaining in her section. You can bring the sample to Erin at the Nature Conservancy office in Keene Valley if you are uncertain about its identification. So you'll take the picture of the species either in the field or when you get back home, and send it to us, and especially to Erin, because she's the expert. And then if she's unable to identify it from the picture, then hang on to that sample, and you can bring her that sample, or whatever's easiest. We'll figure out how to get it from you and get it to Erin so she can determine what exactly it is that you've found. If you do find an invasive species during a rake toss, use the rake toss fields in the form. Open the fields by touching or choosing the plus sign under rake toss locations. When you open the fields, the app will grab your coordinates. Give each rake toss an ID number and use this number for any samples you take. Record the water depth and abundance of all species on the rake. Record the name of the invasive species and the abundance of the invasive species on the rake. Take a photo, as we described before, and create additional species and rake toss records as needed. This is a little data schema that the Heritage Program developed just to show you, and you can have a look at this later, the different fields in the survey form and how they work with the lake that you're surveying. The weather fields are optional, but it does help if we know if it was a cloudy day or a sunny day, because you get a better survey. You are able to see more on a sunny day than a cloudy day. So that's a helpful piece of information to know, but it's up to you whether or not you fill in the weather fields. And finally, you can complete your survey. When you finished filling out the form, touch or choose the check in the green bar at the bottom right of the screen. If you are in the field, or if you're out there on your survey in the backcountry, choose Save this survey in the outbox. When you are back in an area with internet, ideally with internet, because it's a lot of data to upload. So if you don't have good connectivity, it may not upload. Touch or choose the outbox. Select your survey from the outbox and then answer yes to reopen the survey. Touch or choose the check in the green bar at the bottom right of the screen and then choose Send Now. The survey will upload to the online project map. So as soon as you upload your survey, immediately we're going to see it on our online map. It'll pop up as a polygon this year, as a polygon. As you can see in this image, this is Inman Pond, where Maggie and I were last week or the week before. So whatever area you surveyed and you outlined, we'll see that immediately. And then there'll also be a table of data. So all of the fields that you filled out will have that information and the coordinates and your name and the names that you put in there. So we'll know where you were and what you did and what you found. So it's a really great program. This is the same map that you can go to find a pond to survey. And the ponds for survey will be, as you can see in the legend on the left, it says ponds for survey and it has yellow dot. So you look for ponds with the yellow dot, and those are ponds that are open for survey. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and let's see if there's any questions. Rick says, when going out on our own, are there particular locations? Oh, okay, that's what we just talked about. So if you have any questions about that, I know that it might be difficult to ask at this point, but go ahead and put those in the chat box. And then just real quickly, I am going to show you the Dropbox that we're going to send you a link to and show you what's in that Dropbox so you know what you're looking at when we get there. Okay. Okay, do you guys see that? It gets a little confusing when you're sharing screens and looking at your own screen at the same time. Okay, so here's the Dropbox we're going to share with you. And what we have in there is a copy of all the presentations you've seen today, including the homework slides, which are in this folder. And then we've got Erin's slides, and we have Maggie's slides, and then we had the brief overview that I did. So that's all in there. Then we also have this folder called handouts, and we have resources on species ID. So we've got things like this keychain that you can make. Although if you come on an outing, I think Maggie said she'd be able to make these for everyone that comes on an outing. And basically what this is, the end product is you put it on a keychain, and each one of these little plant cards is laminated on the keychain, and it has the description of the plant on the back. So you can take that out in the boat with you, and it's really helpful when you find a plant to help determine if it's a species of concern. And then this is just a copy of, oh, this is taken from a identification manual. And so all of our target species are also in here with a lot of information about how to identify those species. So we have that. Then this is just a copy of our priority slide that we saw in our overview, just showing you the 10 species that we're looking for. And this one here is a really great step-by-step sort of decision tree that you could also put in a plastic bag, each sheet in a plastic bag, or laminate it yourself. We might be able to do this. I'm not sure if we'll get this one done for the outings or not, but it just takes you through and asks you questions about the plant that you're trying to identify. And a simple question in each step, and each step takes you to another set of questions. And by the time you get to the end of the questions, you should know what kind of plant you have. So it's extremely helpful, and it'll really help you begin to learn the plants. Okay, let's go back to handouts. And then we have this program details, and we've got just a reminder on clean, drain, and dry, how to do that. We've got a map of the Lake Champlain Basin to help you figure out, where you need to focus your survey. In addition, we have the online map, but this might be helpful as well. This is a really important sheet. This is a bunch of links. This is where we have the link to the online map that'll help you find a pond to survey and show you the data of ponds that have been surveyed. We've got a link to the outings, to other citizen science projects we have, to APIP website, to IMAP invasives, to some other sites that are really good for pictures of invasives. The iNaturalist, this is where the iNaturalist informal project on the native species is to help you identify native species. Some videos on clean, drain, and dry and how to protect our Adirondack waters. Some more field guides. There's a link to where our Lake George office and store is, which has maps and guidebooks. There's also maps and guidebooks at our Heart Lake facility as well, but I don't know if they have as many as the one in Lake George. And then some links to hiking essentials, leave no trace. And then this final link is the site that will help you make a topo map to take on your trip with you if you don't have the full-size topo map. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I think that's it. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. So again, that's the end of our program. We really enjoyed and really appreciate you being with us today and having an interest in protecting Adirondack ponds and lakes and helping with monitoring these beautiful backcountry ponds and lakes. And keep an eye out for an email from Maggie, and we'll send you the recording of this presentation as well as links to the Dropbox and some other helpful information that you could use. And feel free to contact us at any time if you have questions or if something that we sent you isn't working right, we can make sure we help you out. All right, well, have a wonderful day and please stay cool and please stay well. Do Maggie or Erin, do you have anything else?
No, thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you all.
All right, have a great day.